1989, in this little volume which you see here, and according to the preface, consisted of a series of fragments which H.P. Blavatsky had memorized from a much larger collection of esoteric tracts and precepts, which he refers to as the Book of the Golden Precepts. This particular copy, by the way, is inscribed to Miss Anna Ballard, to help her to become a yogini, from her affectionately H.P. Blavatsky, London, 1889. Therefore, this is as authentic an edition of the book as we can really expect to find. It contains not only the three sections relating to the journey toward enlightenment, but the commentaries and glossaries at the back describing the use of Oriental terms. I think the first point that comes to our thoughtfulness in connection with this book is that it is by far the most evidential in the matter of indicating H.P. Blavatsky's knowledge of Mahayana Buddhism. In this particular little volume, she clearly indicates not only her familiarity with this particular school of Buddhist thought, but her strong addiction to the thinking of the Northern school. In other words, the entire study as contained in this little treatise has to do with the Bodhisattva concept, which we have discussed here on other occasions, but which perhaps it would be advantageous to summarize once more. Buddhism divides into two basic schools. The southern, or the school of the elders, called the Hinayana, and the northern, or the Mahayana, the great vehicle. There was originally a middle vehicle between these two, but it did not gain any lasting prominence in Asiatic religious thinking. The southern school has as its basic project, or its great goal, the creation of the Arhat, the creation of the unworldly person who has renounced all of the material associations of life, who has rejected involvement in the mystery of existence, and has determined to attain by will and yoga the emancipation which is covered by the concept of the entry into nirvana. In other words, the southern school seeks to end all suffering by extinguishing the individual himself. But it is conceivably possible for man to kill out within himself, degree by degree, the essence of his own individuality. That in so doing, he has discovered the only escape from illusion, inasmuch as he is bound to illusion by every concrete faculty of his own mind and every emotion of his own heart. Thus, in the southern school, theoretically at least, we have this complete renunciation of all attachment, the resolution to attain the solitary path of liberation, to become not only the truth seeker, but the truth finder, not through the common experiences of life, but by the rejection of life. This does not mean that the Arhat is to become a destructive person. He is not one who is rejecting society in an anarchistic way. He is not trying to ruggedly create a new kind of society. He is simply rejecting all worldliness. And is not attempting to put in the place of illusion any tangible, physical, material, objective reality which he may experience or discover. This particular point of view, of course, was what we might term archaic. It is assumed to represent very completely the teachings of the oldest sacred writings of Buddhism. Yet, as we mentioned on another evening, the concept, though upheld by the Scripture, is not upheld by the example of Gautama Buddha himself. Far from renouncing all association with humanity, he devoted the greater part of his life to the continuous service of his fellow men. Certainly there is no evidence that he withheld from those around him any knowledge, consolation, insight, or understanding which could contribute to their enlightenment. Therefore, the life of the Buddha cannot be regarded as an example of the dicta of the Southern School. In the particular book we are working with, The Voice of the Silence, H.P. Blavatsky criticizes through the translation of old fragments of the Northern system this attitude of complete rejection of life. She is not in favor, obviously, of the solitary journey toward reality. She does not believe that it is the highest form of life, highest destiny of the human being, to become absorbed into a non-existence with no consideration for other human beings. Of course, this was the primary point of demarcation in the very early time, which led to the mysticism of Nagarjuna. And according to H.P.B., the Book of the Golden Precepts was part of the wonderful storehouse of esoteric knowledge guarded by the Nagas in the Iron Tower in India, the mysterious repository of the esoteric doctrine of Buddhism. So in this book, we see Madame Blavatsky outlining from memory and from fragments that she had learned and contacted, notes she had made various times during her long sojourn in India, putting together this little guide or book of rules for the direction of the sincere truth seeker. There is actually no effort to westernize the basic concepts. Madame Blavatsky assumes in this book, obviously, that there is no essential transformation of material to meet the needs of Western people. So far as the great quest is concerned, East and West must follow the same path. There is no adaptation to the requirements of Western thinking. There is, however, this one very strong sympathetic tie with the West. The concept of unselfishness, the concept of man seeking to attain truth without this lonely, self-centered dedication to some type of Oriental discipline. Out of the Buddhist texts themselves, there can only be one other clear statement of the path, and that is the Northern School. And Madame Blavatsky, following also the Buddhist position almost exactly, refers to this school as the heart doctrine, and the Southern School as the eye doctrine. The eye, in other words, in this case, refers to the power of vision, the optical sense. or the concept of the exoteric, which sees the external only, represented by the eye, as contrasted to the esoteric, which experiences from within, the heart doctrine, knowing with the heart, following the heart, setting up the tabernacle of hope in the heart rather than in the mind. Perhaps it is in this segregation or separation that we come the nearest to the east-west position. Actually, in Ceylon and other areas under the influence of the Hinayana, or what Madame Blavatsky calls the eye doctrine, we must realize that the average Buddhist is a very kindly person by instinct. Men are often much more kind than their beliefs. And we find that even now in our Western religion, where faiths which have a considerable streak of intolerance in them are served by very kindly, tolerant people who never realize that their beliefs are more stony, more cold or stony than the ordinary concepts might suggest. So we do not necessarily find people always following the letter of an ancient belief. Today we know that in Burma and in Ceylon and in Thailand or Siam, Buddhism is a very warm belief in spite of the fact it belongs to the Southern School. The only real difference between the two systems in modern practice, the only practical difference so far as the average person is concerned, is that the Southern School clings more definitely to the imagery of the historical Buddha Gautama. Nearly all imagery in the Southern School is that of the historical Buddha. Buddha, his apostles or disciples, may sometimes also receive some imagery, but the only bodhisattva recognized in the Southern School is the Maitreya, or Buddha to come. The other vast order of metaphysical beings find no place in the Southern system. Well, outside of this, we find the same general happiness of people. We do not find that this lonely road to extinction has led, for the most part, to lonely living in this world. The family life in these Buddhist countries is strong. The friendliness and relationships are gentle and, for the most part, kindly. So even in Southern Buddhism, while the creed remains very severe in its principles, it is served by people who are not especially severe in their own conduct. The great stronghold of Southern Buddhism today is not in Ceylon, Burma, or Siam. It is in Germany and England. But while, of course, the following is small in Europe, the modern European intellectual rather favors the intense detachment, the freedom from all theological involvements which have distinguished the Southern School of thought. It seems more rational in the sense of science. Science believes that when we are dead forever. And Southern Buddhism changes this into a final extinction as a result of outgrowing worldliness. But science and Southern Buddhism both seem to end in some kind of an extinction. Therefore, they more or less favor each other's points of view. The Northern system, however, is more completely idealistic and more theological. Therefore, is not as popular with the German intellectuals. It is, to them, again, a compromise with the old superstitions which they feel they have outgrown. Madame Blavatsky very firmly takes the ground that the Northern system represents the true custodian of the esoteric doctrine, that it is not merely a matter of the system that you use. It's possible that both the southern and the northern systems of Buddhism have both derived much of their esoteric discipline from yoga and Vedanta, and from the early religions of India. Many of the quotations used by HPV in The Voice of the Silence are pre-Buddhistic, that have become involved in and become part of Buddhist thinking. Actually, however, as she points out, it is not just simply this orthodoxy, this dedication to development, to growth, to the inner ways of things, this renunciation of that which is illusional, mundane, or to the more mystical inclined, worldly. This is not the entire problem. The great problem lies in the warmth element, that the individual's motives have a tremendous part to play in his spiritual attainment. And to Madame Blavatsky, the motive of the individual searching for salvation for his own sake is not the highest motive. This, of course, leads to some controversy between the different systems. There can be no doubt that the Arhat system does produce the possibility of the individual attaining the nirvanic condition by a magnificent self-discipline, a renunciation of weariness, and a final overcoming of all sensory processes and pressures within his own nature. However, this must indicate in some way that there is more than one kind of nirvana. There has to be more than one kind of end, because there are certainly several means by which this end can be attained. And from the general tone of The Voice of the Silence, it would be implied by H.P. Blavatsky that the Arhat seeking completely isolated attainment, having in this very process itself fallen into a kind of illusion, that in so doing he is going to attain the end which he believes. If he believes that he will enter nirvana and cease to exist, he will carry this belief, but it will be an attitude rather than a fact. And when he attains this nirvana, which he believes, he will attain an internal state of his own existence, which, however, may not prove to be ultimate, may not attain the final consummation which he desires. It is quite possible that the individual who believes that after he leaves this life, he will go to a summer land with palaces and white-robed figures, may be able to evoke this picture within his own consciousness and actually believe that he attains it. If, on the other hand, he believes that this summer land is an illusion, and that the only true end is a complete suspension of existence in a colorless, soundless, dimensionless sphere, he may, after death, find himself in such a region. But whether the region is any more real than the summer land of the spiritualist is another problem. And H.P. Blavatsky seems to imply that there is grave danger that this isolated truth seeker is going to end in a universe which he has created himself, rather than in the infinite which he has expected to attain. In any event, she leaves a strong sense that there is something wrong with this tremendous search for liberation. It is quite possible that the being may attain that condition of the taking upon itself of the Dhammakaya, or the body of infinites, so that this being, this Arhat being, who has renounced all existence, may so sever all connections with material existence that it cannot return, when it cannot take on again any of the conditions of existence. But then comes the question, under these circumstances, will this being find peace or loneliness? Will it really have outgrown the world in the truest sense, or will it merely have separated itself from the world, perhaps to wistfully look back sometime upon a condition which is no longer changeable by any action of its own? But in any event, Blavatsky certainly favors and gives greater consideration to the concept of the Bodhisattva attainment. I think that one point that we also have to bear in mind, however, is that she differs from the Northern school also in one particular. The Orthodox Mahayanist regards the Bodhisattvas as essentially symbolic extensions of the powers of the historical Buddha. In other words, all the metaphysical Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are personifications of principles. They are not regarded as beings. They are not held to be true persons. Rather, they are ideal types. And in this, the Northern school has a tendency to create a curious kind of theology without gods. A theology which Dr. Anasaki calls a cosmotheism, a system in which embodied principles take the place of personalities. Madame Blavatsky, on the other hand, thinks much more literally in terms of the Bodhisattva concept. She takes the lotus of the good law, the great Lotus Sutra of Northern Buddhism, and in the stories of the attainments of the Bodhisattvas, she takes it much more for granted that the average truth seeker is ultimately going to attain the Bodhisattva condition, and therefore that the Bodhisattvas are true beings, representing a degree of evolvement from mankind itself. That they are therefore not merely personifications of principles. They are dedicated, illumined persons who have attained to a stupendous degree of internal insight. They are demigods or superhuman beings, but they are beings as such. They are not merely personifications of principles. Now, I think in this particular point, we probably will have to make a division between these embodied principles and the possible involvement of human beings to the Bodhisattva state. This has been suggested in dividing the waters to allow for two kinds of Bodhisattvas. One kind being eternal, being truly the embodiments of the various cosmic energies arising from the great source of all energy, the eternal, luminous, unconditioned, unchanging Virakana Buddha. From this vast cosmic being flow forth the attributes and conditions, as in the case of light coming from the sun. The light itself breaks into colors like a spectrum, and to each of the colors of this light a name is given. And to one of these colors is given the name Kanman, to another one of these colors Manju, to a third Fugan, to still another Miroku. They represent essentially the colors of the infinite light of truth itself, They represent division within energy, by which energy is qualified, and by being so qualified becomes available to maintain the various orders of life that exist in nature. Light sustains all life, and light itself is a manifestation of an infinite life. And this infinite life is, dear O'Connor, by reaching your life. The human bodhisattvas, those who are growing up from nature, from the human state to the superhuman state, ascend along the paths of light, which are indicated or intimated in the book, The Voice of the Silence. Each of these ascending beings, human beings at one time, less than human at another, more than human at still another, these belong to rays. They belong to, in some mysterious way, to orders of life. From light they have their origin, but we have all originated from some color of the light. Therefore our own psychic integration belongs to one of these rays, and we gradually attain our enlightenment by ascending to truth along the paths of light which are peculiar to ourselves. Therefore we can use an example which perhaps will indicate the general thinking. The Bodhisattva Kanban, representing the eternal, luminous principle of compassion. HBB points out clearly that in her thinking, Avalokita, or Kanban, is not an attribute, but an eternal principle in itself. Compassion is not simply a quality of mercy that is not strained. Compassion is a color of the eternal light of space itself. These wonderful virtues, therefore, have a free existence as light, as energy, as substance. Therefore, perhaps they correspond at least partly to the Greek idea of the eternal gods. But they are actually the eternal colors in the white light. They are the mysterious spectrum of eternal energies. Therefore, the principle of compassion is of itself a living thing, an attribute of existence. And there are those who, in truth-seeking, are inevitably drawn to this particular light color. Just as some will say, I prefer blue to green, and another will say, I prefer brown to orange, so we can say in ourselves that we have certain spiritual preferences. These preferences are not at the exclusion of other virtues or other values, but they are by nature instincts of our own. Just as some may be more instinctively drawn to music, and others perhaps to painting. Some find their fulfillment in bestowing their love and their lives upon their children. Some seek rather a public service, whereby they become parents of mankind. Each in his own way, according to his own inner dedication, according to the way to which he belongs, instinctively reacts, a little more intensely, a little more clearly, to one type of this light power. If, therefore, the individual who is seeking attainment is resolved to dedicate a life to service, to become the compassionate power, almost trying to assume in itself the burden of the sin of the world, the all-understanding one, the all-comprehending, the all-sympathizing, that which is moved by all sorrow, the large, mysterious bodhisattva ear, indicating the power to hear the cry of the smallest creature floating in the sunbeam, so that there is not a single breath of life or death in space that the ear of the compassionate one does not hear it. This inclines certain persons to this way of life, and they ascend the path that leads to the stars by approaching the heart of that quality which is most admirable to them. So we have the common quality. Then we may have another quality also, as represented by the Bodhisattva Manju. Manju is the one that is referred to in the Lotus Sutra as a young man of good family, a prince of the heavenly world. Manju represents essential learning, learning that transcends knowledge, learning that submerges self in the complete acceptance of universal truth. Just as surely as compassion leads to universal insight and universal love, so learning leads to universal wisdom, and most of all in learning, universal obedience. Therefore, Manju represents knowledge regenerated, redeemed, purified, spiritualized, until it becomes the perfect attainment leading to the salvation of all that lives through the complete acceptance of laws that have come to be known and understood. Thus, each of these ray colors draws to itself from humanity those of special attribute or ability, and through the long systems of embodiments through which individuals pass, it becomes obvious that gradually their own farther ray or farther star becomes obvious within them, and they begin the journey back to that color of the infinite life which gave them being in the first place. This is part of the idea of the Northern School. But the Northern School has as its tremendous goal the achievement of the serving Bodhisattva. Now, the Southern School takes the ground that this is all useless. For actually, if you wish to take the sword of quick detachment, if you wish to destroy the destroyer, if you wish to assume that the mind is the slayer of the real, then we must finally assume that law is infinite, and that mercy and wisdom and all of these others, these qualities, are only man's images of perfections arising within his own nature. Some of the Buddhist sects of today in the Northern School frankly affirm this to be true. But Blavatsky's point of view is a little different in this. Whether the problem implies that the Bodhisattva is merely a symbol of the natural humanitarianism in man, or whether it is truly part of this great fabric that sustains the universal plan, the great truth remains. The mysterious virtue in this growth of the human consciousness resulting from dedication to unselfishness. That instead of killing out the self, as in the Southern School, the self is expanded until it encloses all other things within its own nature. Instead of killing out love, universalize love. Instead of killing out desire, redeem desire, so that it may desire the salvation of all that lives. Take each of these faculties and instead of destroying it, expand it to its cosmic proportions. Perfect it, redeem it, vitalize it with life, transmute it with the alchemy of insight, and gradually escape from the illusion of self, not by destroying self, but by so enlarging it that all that exists becomes part of self. By this means you achieve in a strange way almost the same goal. For it is difficult to tell in practice the difference between the individual whose being has returned to the infinite and the individual whose being has become infinite by virtue of its own internal enlargement. So in the path of the golden precepts as contained in Madame Blavatsky's outline, the primary dedication of the truth seeker must be essentially unselfish. It must be a dedication to the good of all that lives. And only by this dedication can the mysterious bypaths that lead to darkness be completely and entirely escaped. The unselfishness now takes the position which assumes the proportions of a total investment of self in the need of other creatures. Learning is no longer because it will give us knowledge, but because through it we can impart knowledge to all that lives. The individual, therefore, has to avoid the primary obstacles to spiritual growth. And here, I think, Madame Blavatsky was speaking for the members of the ES section and was also trying to bring home to Western scholars and Western students something of the moral value of decision in terms of truth-seeking. It is not enough for an individual to take an obligation that he is going to search for truth. Nor is it enough for him to train his mind, integrate his faculties, and resolve to continue his search until truth rewards him. The only important consideration from the beginning is motive. Why does the individual wish to attain the truth? If he says he wishes to obtain it because it will deliver him from evil, the motive is good but not the best. If he says that he wishes to obtain it in order to escape from the suffering of the world, this motive is not as good as the previous one. The individual who wishes to attain wisdom in order that he may gain some advantage over an ignorant world has the lowest motive there is. And because of the lowness of the motive, the end can never be high. Built into the pattern, the plan, the search we are making, is the outcome of it karmically in the terms of the motive that impelled it. Man can never attain more than the level of principle upon which he began the search. Of course, it is conceivable that he may gradually change his attitude and move from selfishness to a more unselfish position. But Madame Blavatsky would imply that this is not a desirable state of affairs, because the final motive must ultimately reassert itself. And if we began in selfishness, we still have built bad karma, which we must sometime expiate, and which will sometime confront us with the inevitable consequence of karma. All karma leads the individual to mistake a wrong for a right. All karma leads in some way to the acceptance of the reality of the unreal. This is illusion, and real motive must always lead to some kind of illusion, because it cannot lead to truth. Now, some will hold that it makes no difference what motive you have, and you are climbing a mountain. If you reach the top, you have attained the end. But in the mountains of the Himalaya, this is not true from the standpoint of the Mahayana school. Everything is motive. Everything is the basic determination which impels the action. So for the benefit of our Western chairs, H.P.B. points out the tremendously important problem of right perspective at the very beginning of the search. Three things are necessary. right perspective, right resolution, and continuity or continuance of effort. Right perspective means that the individual has the true goal in sight, and that the end he is seeking is truth, not merely some consolation for himself in a selfish, self-centered emergency. Therefore, it is impossible for the individual to achieve the greater end by lesser dedication. Also, we realize that there can be no growth unless the individual who is attempting to grow practices the principles which are given to him by the Guru. To simplify this thinking, the Guru, in this case the Buddha, gave his disciples the simple laws. Refrain from all evil. Practice the good. Purify the mind. These were the rules, the basic rules. Any effort to grow by compromising these rules or without enforcing them must ultimately lead to illusion. No matter how sincere the person is, unless he does purify the mind, unless he does refrain from evil, and unless he does practice the good, he cannot attain the karmic consequences of the keeping of the mystery of the three jewels, or the Triratna. So Buddhism says that any attempt to grow without keeping the law must ultimately lead to some kind of a strange paroxysm within the self, an infinite confusion, a strange fatalistic sickness, because we are torn apart by our own inconsistency. If we use disciplines and definite exercises to advance or to unfold the sensitivity of the psychic organism, and at the same time do not provide it with an enlightened mind, a purified emotional life, and a redeemed body, then the efforts to unfold the spiritual powers within the individual will destroy the economy of the mental, emotional, and physical personality. There cannot be this conflict without ultimate loss, a terrible loss to all concerned. Thus, H.P.B. points out that it is very important to get into our basic consciousness this concept of growth not for ourselves, but for that which is not ourselves, and always the realization that we will not devote ourselves and dedicate ourselves to the service of others unless we have real love for them. And if we do not have real love for all that lives, it is better to turn from the gate and wait, because otherwise we're going to be in trouble. And that was one of the difficulties that arose among H.P.B.'s own disciples. They tried to recognize growth as a scientific process. They put their minds to it with all they had, but they did not put their hearts to it with the fullness of compassion. Now, when we realize the meaning of compassion, we immediately come almost to the same situation that has gradually come into focus about crime in our world. We are more and more convinced that criminals are not bad, they are sick. And this is one of the attitudes that we have to carry into the world of compassion. The people are not bad. They are confused. They are sick. The individuals are not evil. Rather, they are followers of illusion. They have been caught up in an unreality. And in the service of this unreality, they have become selfish, hateful. They have injured each other. They have borne false witness. They have robbed and pillaged. They have done everything that it is imaginable to do, perhaps, to be of injury to others. Not because they are bad, but because they do not know what is right. They may have morally some concept of a code. They may know that they are dishonest, legally speaking. But in their consciousness, they have no vision of reality. Therefore, in their consciousness, they are benighted. They dwell in darkness. They are victims of illusion. They are slaves that have been brought into bondage by Mara, the lord of deceits. So that the compassionate one is in no way of different mind when viewing the person who is kind and the person who is cruel. Compassion must reach them both equally. At the same time, without under any condition failing to sense the true values. But compassion is the realization that the person who is behaving the worst is the one who is in the greatest need for insight, love, understanding, sympathy, and compassion. And ways must be found to help this person so that the Bodhisattva does not renounce nirvana in order to serve his friends. He renounces nirvana to be of service to all that lives, whether it be good or bad. Without this complete dedication, there can never be escape from the processes of judgment. And the moment we judge, compassion dies. The moment we assume any of these prerogatives to ourselves, we are in danger. The only passion of which man can be proud is compassion. And this is the mood that opens the portals of the world of spiritual growth. So the purpose of evolution in the search for realities is to produce within each aspiring soul this tremendous sense of selfless dedication to need. But the modern school seeks to produce the type of esoteric disciple who no longer even cares whether he is ever enlightened or not. He is not seeking enlightenment. All he is asking for is a job. He is asking for the privilege of giving everything that he has, everything that he is, to those in need, without the slightest hope of appreciation, expectancy of appreciation, or even desire for reward. It is the total giving. And it is the individual who makes this total giving that is also implied in the Christian mystery, where Jesus says very frankly that those who lose their lives for his sake will find eternal life. It is the complete renunciation of self-purpose, the complete end of the desire to know for the sake of knowing anything. The individual doesn't want to know so that he can face life better or death better. He wants to know in order that in complete forgetfulness of himself, he can help others to face life better and to face death better. His own fate is unimportant to him. And because in this way he loses his life by giving it up, so he shall find it again more abundantly. The motive is so essential in this that Madame Blavatsky makes a very clear point of it. That the motive is always the same. That the great path of enlightenment is the path of self-forgetfulness. The path of the complete power of the person to transcend the experience of being truly, greatly injured by anything. He is no longer concerned with how much he is injured. He is only mindful that under no condition, for any reason, must he ever injure anything. Now, this makes a rather complicated life in the Western world. And for most people, it seems utterly impossible. And the great teachers of the Northern system, therefore, point out very clearly that the impossible is not expected. While we are not living in Tibet or in Mongolia, we must not forget that those countries have their problems just as we have. That it was never easy anywhere for the individual to live according to the very highest interpretation of the golden precepts. The individual had to live according to his insight. If he tried to live beyond and above his insight, he lost the support of his own nature. He might know within himself that he should do certain things. But if he is not able to do these things without too much strain, stress, and problem in his own life, he is then obviously not ready. When he is ready, he will find that the way will open, as the Red Sea opened for the Israelites. But when the time is right, when he becomes utterly harmless, nothing will harm him. And this was the secret of the old sages of the old Arhats of Buddhism, who wandered through jungles, and the animals guarded them. There are stories in the old books which are probably true, where the old sages were warned that there were dangerous animals in the neighborhood, like a ferocious tiger. So the old sage went out in the jungle, met the tiger, and they walked along side by side, and when the old sage went to sleep that night, the tiger gave his body for a pillow. There was no evil in the sage. There was in this enlightened being only love for all that lives. We know in the animal kingdom, and we know from working with people who have in turn become what they call animal people, those who are able to train and control animals, that there are psychic sympathies between men and animals, and that if the animal knows the human being is right, its attitude is usually not dangerous. And there are many cases where animals of the most ferocious nature have fled to men to escape other dangers, sensing within themselves that the human being is some way capable of protecting them. So in the idea of the golden precepts in Northern Buddhism, emphasis is shifted, as will be found in nearly all of the ancient writings, from the concept of the nirvana as the ultimate to the establishment of a different concept of afterlife existence. The individual is still held by the bonds of rebirth and karma. He is still within a universe of absolute law. But as men in various professions can earn different wages, and each workman is worthy of his hire, so it is also that those workmen who are engaged in the building of the everlasting house receive their wages according to their merits, some receiving the wages of those who carry water, others receiving the wages of those who build, and still others those who oversee the builders. So it is in the great experiences of spiritual maturity. Individuals attaining varying degrees of true achievement bring upon themselves appropriate karmic reactions, Therefore, man may not only think of himself in his present state and in his ultimate state. He may think of himself in his transitional state, moving from his present degree of enlightenment to a greater and still greater degree. This was the concept behind the creation of the idea of the paradise of the Buddhas, such as Amitabha, or Virakara, or Hosa, or Shaka, any one of the great metaphysical Buddhas, or historical ones, who have built worlds in space to be the blessed abiding places of those who have been faithful to their teachings. So in the northern system, the individual is rewarded for doing the best that he knows. And his reward is to be released from that degree of evil which he has transmuted in himself to a corresponding degree of good. Thus, in the northern system, the householder, the shopkeeper, the businessman, all these and many others are perfectly able to attain the spiritual graces without renouncing their professions, without giving up their works, without leaving their homes and families. That the achievement is always according to motivation, and that the individual who is dedicated to the service of those responsibilities that he has assumed and serves them faithfully is just as spiritually unfolding as the person who renounces the world to go out on some solitary course of arhatship. Actually, therefore, the world itself becomes the great hall of initiation. The worldly problems become the steps which lead into the inner sanctuary of the mysteries. The Mahayana position in this case, I think, is very well taken. For instead of the yogas of the detached, renounced, unworldly person, now comes the more kindly yogas of the fulfillment of duty, the fulfillment of the needs of others. The unselfish parent is just as much a victor by renunciation as the person who walks out on all his attachments. The northern Buddhist does not believe in this walking out of anything. He believes in working through all things, and that in the course of embodiments, life after life, the individual has earned the right to finally achieve freedom, to devote his entire existence to his spiritual growth. When the time comes, he will earn this right and it will be given to him. But he must never anticipate his own right to walk out on that which is his present need. Never for one moment allow the advantage of self to impel the person to a deed that is not truly compassionate. Those who despitefully use them, well, this is a merit. And this is a very hard merit for modern man to take on enthusiastically. Well, how can he expect to take on the whole illusion of the world and work through it to liberation if he cannot take on a small weakness of his own? How does he expect to unfold this wonderful mystery of life within himself if he cannot make a first simple offering at the altar of eternity? So in the book of the Golden Precepts, we find the individual reminded of the three natures of the Buddha himself, and of how these natures are involved in the growth and unfoldment of the disciple. We may say that the Arhat body, the Arhat is recognized in Northern Buddhism, but he is made subordinate to the Bodhisattva. In the Northern system, the Arhat is no longer the solitary sage seeking nirvana. The Arhat now becomes a warden in the great house of the mysteries. The Arhat is now the custodian. He is now the Guru, the great order of the Gurus. The Arhats are the teachers. They are the disseminators of the doctrine. Therefore, they are the ones who function and continue to function in the lowest of the three bodies, the Nirmanakaya. They are the ones who continue the terrestrial forms of things. And in the art of Northern Buddhism, the Arhats, whether it be the group of 16 or the circle of 500, the Arhats are always represented as grave-faced men, some of rather amazing appearance, some rather grotesque, some giving the impression of extreme severity, and others, like some of the Zen patriarchs, really quite happy and good-natured. But they dress in the robes of monks. Their heads are shaven in most cases, and they live in hermitage, they live in the forest, or they walk in the marketplaces, they teach, they serve the sick, they represent the degree of the truth seeker who is dedicated to the first labor of the northern system, and that is growth through common service. These teachers are the dedicated servants of truth, and they claim to be no more than servants. They are also the ones, according to the esoteric tradition, who are supposed to be the guardians of the doctrine of a Buddha, while there is no actual Buddha incarnate in the world. Therefore, the Arhats are to continue the administration of worldly affairs from the time of the passing of Gautama to the advent of the Maitreya Buddha. The Arhat becomes in Europe the adept, and in the esoteric teaching he is the higher initiate order, composed of those who are the custodians of the secret truths of knowledge, and are also the masters holding the hidden keys to the perfections of all arts and sciences. The alchemical adepts and the Kabbalistic adepts are well known in European literature. They are the masters of wisdom in the old philosophy. They are the hierarchies that in India are represented by the orders of the gurus or teachers. In the northern system, the Bodhisattva is no longer represented in these earthly robes. The only Bodhisattva who maintains the Arhat form or quality is Jizo, the protector of children. He is always represented in priestly vestments and with a shaven head. But all the other Bodhisattvas are usually depicted in princely garments as Indian princes, as might have attended together in the court of Magadha in India. They represent, therefore, that period of Gautama Buddha's historical life in which he was Prince of Kapilavastu. In other words, they recapitulate his princely life. They are usually coroneted. They wear more or less Hindu costumes, elaborate jewelry, armbands, anklets. They may have an elaborate pectoral on the breast or an elaborate necklace type of ornamentation. They may have heavy pendant earrings. They represent, therefore, beings of splendor such as those found on the cave paintings at Ajanta and Ellora in India, like the great Bodhisattva of the Blue Lotus at Ajanta. These Bodhisattvas are therefore the princes of the celestial kingdom, referred to in the sutras as young men of good family. They are the higher adept initiates. They are the ones who have gone beyond and are therefore represented in the Sambhogakaya, or the body of enlightenment, the body of luminosity. In art, they are often symbolized as this vehicle that they have, the soul body, the golden wedding garment of St. Paul, and they are nearly always represented with gilded bodies, and usually haloed and throned. They may have the nimbus behind the head, the halo around the body, or a mandala surrounding the entire religious icon. They may be canopied and surrounded by radiant angels in the iconography of the Asiatic countries. In any event, they represent the princes of the invisible empire. They represent the higher orders, the higher Mahatmas, the Rishis, the great sages. But in the northern Buddhistic system, they have been separately endowed with certain capacities, and they represent what might be termed the Supreme Council of the Great White Brotherhood. This concept, which we find expounded throughout the northern system, means that the Bodhisattvas are the ones who have achieved the highest attainment that man can achieve, and still retain contact with humanity. Now, the point involved in this is rather interesting also, and as it is part of the story in the Voice of the Silence, I think it might be worth mentioning. Man today has actually no awareness of the evolutionary processes taking place within himself. He does not realize that he is himself master over a vast order of living things, that in his bloodstream, muscles, and bones there are living creatures. Creatures that in their own spheres may be just as conscious as he is. He does not know. Because of their total difference, because he has ascended to a much higher level of complete, homogeneous consciousness, he has attained this by losing awareness of them. The human being is no longer capable of extending his consciousness down into a fingernail or into a small area of bone and experiencing the spiritual mystery of the life that is there. For that matter, he cannot reach out around him in nature and experience any creature except himself. He may observe all. He may meditate upon and study many types of life and develop strong sympathies, but he can never identically experience the consciousness of anything except himself. Now, in the ideas of the Northern School, the Bodhisattva has ascended far beyond the ordinary consciousness of man, and the next step would be that he could no longer recall his own humanity. He could no longer be again one with the world he has left behind. One more step, and he would be incapable of pain. One more step, and he could no longer know sorrow. One more step, and he could not walk beside misery with great compassion in his heart. But if he went any further, the mysterious workings of the law itself would lift his consciousness to a degree in which he could no longer tune in the miseries of the ignorant. There would come a point in going upward and onward when something of the law has to be dropped off. It is also pointed out in the Eastern wisdom that this happens in the development of extrasensory perception gamuts. While the individual develops a higher sensory perception, he must drop off one of the lower ones. He cannot bridge beyond a certain amount. If he does, he then creates too much conflict, too much division within himself. He cannot hold together more than a certain number of octaves of consciousness within his own being. So the Bodhisattva has to decide, as he stands in the radiant Sambhoga body, whether he is going to go any further or not. If he does decide to go further, he is forced to relinquish the world. The only other step for him now would be to step through into the nirvana. He would have to go on. But at the moment of the great decision, he does not have to go on. He can voluntarily renounce his own attainment in order to become more and more involved in the suffering of mankind. And the whole great order of the Bodhisattvas in the northern system, and according to this system there are legions moving in from other planets, from other suns, from all dimensions of space, these radiant golden figures. These beings who are still selves by an act of will, who have each and every one of them voluntarily relinquished the great peace, have given up the end of suffering, who have voluntarily chose to remain in sympathetic psychic bond with the sorrow of the world. They have so made this decision in order that they may become this great band of servers, as they were called. They are therefore the great physicians of the soul. They are the teachers and the leaders who have resolved to remain with this one flaw left in themselves. If they reject this one illusion, they can no longer stay. And the question is, what error is it that they hold on to? Not because they have to, but because by so doing, they set in motion the karma which perpetuates their own bondage, and that is their intention. They have to be wrong in something. They choose to be wrong in something. Because by so doing, as an act of choice, having the vision, the wisdom, and the integration to go on, they still choose not to. And the thing that holds them, the binding thing which they cling to, and which keeps them in the world, is love. It is this deep, overwhelming compassion for life, this great feeling of the need of another, in this case, the need of mankind. And they remain fully resolved in themselves, however, that this love is in a sense a defiance of law. But to the Bodhisattva, this defiance is a new definition of law. For to him, love and the law become the same thing. But he willfully and intentionally remains behind as an instrument of a vicarious atonement which he knows does not exist. He knows in all that he cannot save any other living thing. And yet he dedicates himself to that task. He dedicates himself to that task because his heart wins the victory over his reason. And in this mystery, he simply assumes voluntarily a relation of parenthood toward life. It does not mean that he will never achieve liberation, but it means that he will wait to make sure that all else precedes him, that he will not enter into peace as long as suffering exists in the world. Suffering exists only because ignorance exists. Suffering exists only because of the weakness in man in relationship to the recognition of truth. Therefore, it is the duty and responsibility of the Bodhisattva to act as the living bridge, to provide out of his own consciousness the hope for those who do not have as yet the strength to achieve in their own right. He therefore becomes the great teacher, the initiator the Redeemer and the Releaser, yet he is not a God. He is not a Messiah, nor does he act with the authority of any deity. He is not one who has come because he is predestined or foreordained to come. He is not primarily answering the prayer of a suffering humanity. He has taken the bodhisattva obligation for one reason only. In his heart, he could do nothing else. This was his only motive. He does it because in his heart, the happiness, security, peace, and well-being of all other living things is more important than his own. Now, this can be rationalized to one step further. In doing this, in the Sambodha body, what happens? Theoretically, in this stage or in this degree of consciousness, the Bodhisattva has suddenly realized that this world he is coming back to serve is also himself. The Sambodha body, the luminous sphere, means that he has diffused himself throughout all life, realizing this life's identity with his own. Instead of being now one upon whom men move or turn, or one who in turn gazes down upon a suffering world, the Bodhisattva takes on the world. Instead of the nirvana or the great liberation, it voluntarily takes on the great bondage, diffusing itself through all that lives, for the redemption of all that lives and itself. This is the northern concept of the great unselfishness, that the individual who makes this sacrifice, strangely enough, does it not only for the redemption of the imperfection of the world and the redemption of itself, but also for the redemption of those who have passed to the nirvana by the act of the southern school. In other words, the Bodhisattva also redeems the nirvanic plane itself. He acts in the place of those who have chosen to go on of their own accord to their own achievement. He cannot prevent this or change it. He has no right to. But he takes their place as well as his own, and in so doing permeates the entire sphere of existence. Thus it is believed that as the Bodhisattvas disappear from the world, they reappear in the human heart. Their goal or key becomes part of the consciousness of all that lives. And the innerness of things, the dimension of liberation in man, is enriched by the presence of all who have achieved liberation. Now, in the northern school, it is also said that the Gautama Buddha, though he is believed to have attained the paranirvana, and to have entered the great peace or the great silence, actually, according to the northern school, only passed from this world of physical things to an invisible state. As far as his disciples were concerned, as far as they knew, he had achieved the absolute dissolution of his own existence. But the northern school says that he did not. But what he actually did was to take on this Sambodha body again. That Buddha himself, therefore, became, in the moment of nirvana, not only an emancipated soul, but voluntarily reassumed the Bodhisattva state. Therefore, could be diffused throughout the universe again. Now, if you ask for proof of this from the older Buddha writings, then we are reminded that according to the teachings, once the Buddha has ended karma, which Gautama did, and has entered the paranirvana, he cannot ever return for any reason. Yet the Buddha died fulfilled the meditation, completed the karma according to his own words, entered the paranirvana, and then having entered the paranirvana, returned, reanimated his body, and preached his last sermon to his mother. Now, something is wrong in thinking. Because if he had actually attained dissipation of body, if at the moment of the samadhi, which is described in the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, he could not have returned for any reason. Even 1 instant later, he could not have returned. Yet not only does the Northern School say that he returned, and does not only the old Pali scriptures which belong to the Southern School also say that he returned, but the esoteric teachings of both schools say that he was re-embodied as Sankaracharya. So that the story, as the Northern system is, that Gautama himself reassumed the Sambhoga Kaya, or the body of light, and continued to overshadow his arhats and bodhisattvas. This is preserved in the Northern School in the symbolism of the creation of the eastern paradise of Gautama. That in the great mural paintings that were in the Kondo of Horyuji, which were burned, unfortunately, but of which adequate copies are preserved, the 4 great paradise regions are established. The 4th of these is the paradise of the East, which is presided over by the Buddha Gautama, who therefore is creating his own heavenly region to be embodied or to be inhabited by his bodhisattvas and arhats, which are really only fragments of himself. Well, the Northern School goes much more profoundly into the transphysical aspects of these matters. Also, in the Lotus Sutra, there is the famous vision of the stupa. Now, the vision of the stupa is the vision of a tower. And when the gathering of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the Arhats and the great brothers and the great sisters, the nuns, led by the mother and the stepmother of Gautama, when this vast assembly, which extends to the furthest corners of space, is all there suddenly descends from the sky a pagoda or stupa, a monument, a mortuary monument. Seated in it, the vision or body of the preceding extinct Buddha, which is expressly referred to as the extinct Buddha. This being motions to Amida to come and sit with him in the pagoda. And the two have conversed there, Amida and the extinct Buddha. There is one possible explanation to that, namely that as far as the Northern system is concerned, the nirvana does not signify extinction. Or extinction does not mean what we think it does. Rather, it means universalization. It means the expansion of a life beyond the identity of selfness into the identity of allness. And the pagoda, in this case, is the universe itself, which is the tower, monument, or shrine, carrying within it all of the Buddhas that have had historical existence in this world. Many pictures of them are found on the cave walls in Turkestan, the whole sequence of them, in the caves of Tongwang in Chinese Turkestan. So in the Northern system, which H.P. Blavatsky favored, you find the groundwork for the development of her own specialized interpretation of the esoteric schools, an interpretation somewhat influenced by Tibetan thinking, but largely the result of simple Mahayana logic, in which the universe becomes, so to say, this great field of experience. Each level becomes a degree of insight. The individual passes through tests, initiations, and disciplines rising gradually from the state of ordinary human consciousness to the arhat and to the bodhisattva levels of illumination or enlightenment. Having achieved the bodhisattva state, the being then begins to prepare the mysterious region of salvation over which it will preside, as in the case of the Buddha Amida, who took the obligation, when a bodhisattva, to create the Western paradise. So the bodhisattva takes the obligation to create the region of the redeemed, and then gathers to himself, as his obligation, all life within the area of his consciousness. Here we get back to the color rays and so forth, you see. So in this sense, in the case, for instance, of Kanman, we have a certain color significance. And this color significance is important because the bodhisattva is responsible for that order of life which derives from its own ray or belongs to it. The ray of Amida is red. Therefore, this red ray or the red light signifies that degree of cosmic life color over which the paradise of the West has control, and which will bring to it all of these entities. Thus, in the northern system, all of these points are very carefully and very clearly unfolded. H.P. Blavatsky, in this Voice of the Silence, also, therefore, leads finally to the primary subject or theme, which is the voice of the silence. All of this has to do, therefore, with the power of the individual to experience the mystery of the final instruction. In achieving this mystery, the use of the esoteric instruments may also be mentioned. I think there is no place in the literature up to her time of Orientalism in which there is as clear an insight as to the great ceremonial magic of the Northern School. Here the magic that we still find in the symbolism in Japan of the Shingon and the Tendai. In fact, much of her information in this little book would almost imply that she was aware of these sects and their function in modern times. And there is belief and pretty good evidence that Madame Blavatsky was in Japan for at least a short time. In any event, she brings out very clearly the whole great ritualistic theory. She points out, for example, that the double thunderbolt, the Vajra, the mysterious flaming scepter, the double-crowned scepter, which is carried by the Shingon and Tendai adepts, that this is a symbol of the syllables of the sacred name or the word, that the mysterious bird that carries the initiate to heaven is made up of this name also, with one letter on each wing and the third letter forming the body and tail. The use of all such symbolism as this to indicate the development of the esoteric doctrine implies the gradual achievement of certain yogic processes and practices for the achievement of these mystical ends. We will take up the yogic aspect of it next week, but I think we should point out that in Tantra and Yoga, you do have exact scientific methods. In other words, you can get yourself into the same dilemma exactly in these that the world got itself into when it invented nuclear fission. Scientifically, if the knowledge is available, you can split the atom. Scientifically, if the knowledge is available, you can create, with your skill, either instruments of universal destruction or perhaps instruments of universal salvation. Therefore, in yoga and in tantra, you have a skill which can be developed. And what happens to that skill, and what happens because of it, it is determined entirely by the integrity of the disciple. If the disciple, gaining the mechanical power to perform these mysteries of skill, is not at the same time adequately established in the mysteries of the golden precepts, is not firmly set in the path of absolute integrity, he will use skill to destroy himself and destroy others. He cannot be prevented from learning the secrets of life. But with these secrets of life, he will kill himself if he does not develop within his own nature the complete knowledge of the laws of how to use knowledge. And this is again part of the very important instruction. Now, it should be remembered that in the final analysis of things, we must assume, as HPP does, that Mahayana is the heart doctrine. That the final tabernacle, the great pagoda, is in the heart. And in the heart sits forever the radiant form of the Dhyana Buddha. In the heart also is the magnificent symbol of the Virokana Buddha, or the Dainichi Nyorai, the great eternal Sun consciousness being. It is this inner thing that is actually the axis of man's existence. And as the result of the northern concept, the rays and powers of the redeemed have all focused into the heart of man. And here, therefore, we have the great hierarchy governing all things from within themselves, with the heart as the mysterious Shambhala resting on the top of the great diaphragm muscle of the Gobina or Mount Meru. In the Vedic anatomy and physiology, the relationship of all parts of the body to the structure of the universe, this relationship is indicated and very clearly set forth. For our present purpose, however, what we really need to point out is that the final instruction, the final initiation, comes from the self-initiator in the heart. That finally the gurus are no longer great enough. The gurus cannot firmly initiate the individual. The guru can only prepare the individual by providing him with the means for the regeneration of his own nature. Having achieved this, the next step happens. But the guru is not responsible for the final keys of knowledge or for the communication of the mysterious secret name, which is the true name of reality. This can only be communicated by the heart, which whispers to the ear the secret of salvation. Therefore, in the story of the book of the Golden Precepts, the dweller in the heart that remains forever is the mysterious power, being or principle, substance, essence, or life reality, which speaks with the voice of the silence. The great silence is the source of the eternal sound. The Chinese Taoists refer to the great sound as the great Kun. It is the sound which men can hear when they have silenced every other sound in themselves. When so far as man is concerned, the sound and the fury have ceased, then the great Kun is heard. When man has transcended all desire, then the voice of the silent speaks. When the individual no longer speaks with his own mind or his own desires, or for his own mind or for his own desires, but remains eternally silent in the presence of the tabernacle in the heart, then the eternal speaks through man. But it will not speak while man is speaking. It cannot be heard above the sound and the fury which man himself creates. Thus always the final instruction is the way to achieve this remarkable, this mysterious, this truly wonderful inner silence. For all the piles of knowledge, all the questings and searchings of existence must lead in the end to complete peace. Plato had the same concept exactly, except that to him this silence he called faith. And faith is silence, because it is the end of doubting, and doubting is noise, sound, confusion. The individual who has perfect faith asks no more, asks no questions, demands no answers. The individual who has found perfect faith has found silence in himself. For sound in him is fear. Sound in him is the endless working of those lesser faculties which disturb the serenity of consciousness. So whether it be in the Platonic system or in modern Buddhism, the principle is the same, that the goal is to achieve the great quietude, the quietude of the perfect acceptance, the quietude of the quiet acceptance of situations that can never be in any way disturbed. Quietude is the inability of inharmony to rise any longer within the person, because the roots of inharmony have been taken out. It is as though the mysterious vine and fiber of confusion have been cut with the sword of quick detachment. It is as though truly that man has slain the slayer of the real. For this slayer of the real is always the power of unreality to control feeling, thought, and action. So the person who has finally achieved this mysterious sense of transcendency, inasmuch as there is nothing left in the world to dislike, there is nothing left of ourselves to want, to desire, to demand, or to command. There is no longer desire to be like anything or to change anything. Only the realization that the infinite plan is working infinitely and that all things are inevitably going to come well. In the silence of this complete acceptance and this complete confidence comes the voice of the silence. Now, the voice of the silence arising within the stillness of man is described in ancient Eastern symbolism as the mysterious radiant fiat arising, floating, hovering above the great sea of timeless eternity, where the individuality is returned to the ocean of the infinite. And this great silence is always in the beginning of things. And in the opening verses of Genesis, there is the deep, without shape, without form, and void. And there was the Spirit of Elohim moving upon the face of the waters. And in the modern Buddhistic concept, this is also the same thing. Where in the absolute inner silence, the mysterious powers, the mysterious situation, the three tremendous syllables of the eternal word move upon the face of the quietude of man's deepness. And in that moment, the fiat is spoken. the voice of silence thunders, and in that instant a creation is born. For in that moment, the lower nature of everything that lives or exists is suddenly permeated throughout its entire structure with the lightning flash of the divine fiat. From that moment on, creation is ensouled with the Creator. And from the union of creation and Creator comes forth the infinite diversity of created things. But in this moment that the individual experience of the fiat is concerned with, the voice of the silence, in the instant when this voice is heard, in that moment, time receives into itself the fullness of eternity. In that moment, every fragment of existence, so far as that being is concerned, is ablaze with the eternal truth of things. Infinite life has revealed itself through its manifestation and has been restored to its own identity. So in the idea of the voice of the silence, we have three different levels actually concerned. The voice of the silence is man listening to the first silence that he can know, conscience. It is the individual listening to the voice of the better in his own heart, following the dictates of the nobility of character which he may be urged to compromise every day. That when a person does what is not right, he knows this in himself, even though he may play ignorant. The second silence is the silence of prayerful meditation, the degree of receptivity in which the individual opens his sick, sorrowful, tired nature to receive into it the medicine of the Spirit. For it is in that moment of silence, reaching out into the unknown for hope, that man discovers the true meaning of the Comforter, the power that abides in space to bring peace to those who seek. Then these become in turn the symbols of the final reaching out of consciousness, to receive the final instruction, to receive to itself the perfect meaning of things. And the voice of the silence is finally the name of integrity. It is the infinite, revealing its own infinity to the finite, and establishing the true relationship between all that lives. Pilate asked Jesus, "What is truth?" And Jesus was silent. But in the great silence that follows the clamorings of the world, the truth seeker receives the answer to his question. What is truth? The world cannot answer. Man cannot answer that if the one who asks the question is worldly. It is only when the unworldly asks of the unworldly, and at that moment in which the alone requests of that which is forever alone, the answer. That the mysterious communication, the impact of ultimate reality is possible. And this impact of ultimate reality is the voiceless voice. The voice that is not heard, the voice that speaks in silence, the voice of the great silence itself, which is also found in the Zen mysteries. The great void, the mystery of the vacuity itself. For in the great void there is no void. In the great silence we hear indeed the music of the spheres. In the silence of man's complete acceptance, in the silence of the unquestioning heart, in the silence that has learned to be still and know, there is the direct impact of eternal knowledge upon the truth seeker. It has been called cosmic consciousness, illumination, enlightenment. But it is the one answer to the one question. that comes out of silence. And in answering the one question, it is the answer to all questions. This is the metaphysics, we might say, of the modern system. And in my estimation, this is what is really the essential substance of the Book of the Golden Precepts. And it has been, I think, rather beautifully set forth in the fragments which Madame Blavatsky collected and called The Voice of the Silence. Well, that is all we can do this evening, folks, so thank you very much. Of the Hinayana, or what Madame Blavatsky calls the I doctrine, we must realize that the average Buddhist is a very kindly person by instinct. Men are often much more kind than their beliefs. And we find that even now in our Western religion, where faiths which have a considerable streak of intolerance in them are served by very kindly, tolerant people who never realize that their beliefs are more stony, more cold or stony than the ordinary concepts might suggest. So we do not necessarily find people always following the letter of an ancient belief. Today we know that in Burma and in Ceylon and in Thailand or Siam, Buddhism is a very warm belief in spite of the fact it belongs to the Southern School. The only real difference between the two systems in modern practice, the only practical difference so far as the average person is concerned, is that the Southern School clings more definitely to the imagery of the historical Buddha Gautama. Nearly all imagery in the Southern School is that of the historical Buddha. Buddha, his apostles or disciples, may sometimes also receive some imagery, but the only bodhisattva recognized in the Southern School is the Maitreya or Buddha to come. The other vast order of metaphysical beings find no place in the Southern system. Well, outside of this, we find the same general happiness of people. We do not find that this lonely road to extinction has led, for the most part, to lonely living in this world. The family life in these Buddhist countries is strong. The friendliness and relationships are gentle and, for the most part, kindly. So even in Southern Buddhism, while the creed remains very severe in its principles, it is served by people who are not especially severe in their own conduct. The great stronghold of Southern Buddhism today is not in Ceylon, Burma, or Siam. It is in Germany and England. But while, of course, the following is small in Europe, the modern European intellectual rather favors the intense detachment, the freedom from all theological involvements which have distinguished the Southern School of thought. It seems more rational in the sense of science. Science believes that when we are dead forever. And Southern Buddhism changes this into a final extinction as a result of outgrowing worldliness. But science and Southern Buddhism both seem to end in some kind of an extinction. Therefore, they more or less favor each other's points of view. The Northern system, however, is more completely idealistic and more theological. Therefore, is not as popular with the German intellectuals. It is to them, again, a compromise with the old superstitions which they feel they have outgrown. Madame Blavatsky very firmly takes the ground that the Northern system represents the true custodian of the esoteric doctrine, that it is not merely a matter of the system that you use, It's possible that both the southern and the northern systems of Buddhism have both derived much of their esoteric discipline from yoga and Vedanta, and from the early religions of India. Many of the quotations used by HPV in The Voice of the Silence are pre-Buddhistic, that have become involved in and become part of Buddhist thinking. Actually, however, as she points out, it is not just simply this orthodoxy, this dedication to development, to growth, to the inner ways of things, this renunciation of that which is illusional, mundane, or through the more mystical inclined worldly. This is not the entire problem. The great problem lies in the warmth element, that the individual's motives have a tremendous part to play in his spiritual attainment. And to Madame Blavatsky, the motive of the individual searching for salvation for his own sake is not the highest motive. This, of course, leads to some controversy between the different systems. There can be no doubt that the Arhat system does produce the possibility of the individual attaining the nirvanic condition by a magnificent self-discipline, a renunciation of weariness, and a final overcoming of all sensory processes and pressures within his own nature. However, this must indicate in some way that there is more than one kind of nirvana. There has to be more than one kind of end, because there are certainly several means by which this end can be attained. And from the general tone of The Voice of the Silence, it would be implied by H.P. Blavatsky that the Arhat seeking completely isolated attainment, having in this very process itself fallen into a kind of illusion, that in so doing he is going to attain the end which he believes. If he believes that he will enter nirvana and cease to exist, he will carry this belief, but it will be an attitude rather than a fact. And when he attains this journey toward reality, she does not believe that it is the highest form of life, highest destiny of the human being, to become absorbed into a non-existence with no consideration for other human beings. Of course, this was the primary point of demarcation in the very early time, which led to the mysticism of Nagarjuna. And according to HPB, the Book of the Golden Precepts was part of the wonderful storehouse of esoteric knowledge guarded by the Vedas in the Iron Tower in India, the mysterious repository of the esoteric doctrine of Buddhism. So in this book, we see Madame Blavatsky outlining from memory and from fragments that she had learned and contacted, notes she had made various times during her long sojourn in India, putting together this little guide or book of rules for the direction of the sincere truth seeker. There is actually no effort to westernize the basic concepts. Madame Blavatsky assumes in this book, obviously, that there is no essential transformation of material to meet the needs of Western people. So far as the great quest is concerned, East and West must follow the same path. There is no adaptation to the requirements of Western thinking. There is, however, this one very strong sympathetic tie with the West, the concept of unselfishness, the concept of man seeking to attain truth without this lonely, self-centered dedication to some type of Oriental discipline. Out of the Buddhist texts themselves, there can only be one other clear statement of the path, and that is the Northern School. And Madame Blavatsky, following also the Buddhist position almost exactly, refers to this school as the heart doctrine, and the Southern School as the eye doctrine. The eye, in other words, in this case, refers to the power of vision, the optical sense, or the concept of the exoteric, which sees the external only, represented by the eye, as contrasted to the esoteric, which experiences from within, the heart doctrine, knowing with the heart, following the heart, setting up the tabernacle of hope in the heart rather than in the mind. Perhaps it is in this segregation or separation that we come the nearest to the east-west position. Actually, in Ceylon and other areas under the influence of Nirvana. In other words, the Southern School seeks to end all suffering by extinguishing the individual himself. But it is conceivably possible for man to kill out within himself, degree by degree, the essence of his own individuality. That in so doing, he has discovered the only escape from illusion, inasmuch as he is bound to illusion by every concrete faculty of his own mind and every emotion of his own heart. Thus, in the Southern School, theoretically at least, we have this complete renunciation of all attachment, the resolution to attain the solitary path of liberation, to become not only the truth seeker, but the truth finder, not through the common experiences of life, but by the rejection of life. This does not mean that the arhat is to become a destructive person. He is not one who is rejecting society in an anarchistic way. He is not trying to ruggedly create a new kind of society. He is simply rejecting all worldliness, and is not attempting to put in the place of illusion any tangible, physical, material, objective reality which he may experience or discover. This particular point of view, of course, was what we might term archaic. It is assumed to represent very completely the teachings of the oldest sacred writings of Buddhism. Yet, as we mentioned on another evening, the concept, though upheld by the Scripture, is not upheld by the example of Gautama Buddha himself. Far from renouncing all association with humanity, he devoted the greater part of his life to the continuous service of his fellow men. Certainly there is no evidence that he withheld from those around him any knowledge, consolation, insight, or understanding which could contribute to their enlightenment. Therefore, the life of the Buddha cannot be regarded as an example of the dicta of the Southern School. In the particular book we are working with, The Voice of the Silence, H.P. Blavatsky criticizes through the translation of old fragments of the Northern system this attitude of complete rejection of life. She is not in favor, obviously, of the solitary in this little volume which you see here, and according to the preface, consisted of a series of fragments which H.P. Blavatsky had memorized from a much larger collection of esoteric tracts and precepts, which he refers to as the Book of the Golden Precepts. This particular copy, by the way, is inscribed to Miss Anna Ballard, to help her to become a yogini, from her affectionately H.P. Blavatsky, London, 1889. Therefore, this is as authentic an edition of the book as we can really expect to find. And it contains not only the 3 sections relating to the journey toward enlightenment, but the commentaries and glossaries at the back describing the use of Oriental terms. I think the first point that comes to our thoughtfulness in connection with this book is that it is by far the most evidential in the matter of indicating H.P. Blavatsky's knowledge of Mahayana Buddhism. In this particular little volume, she clearly indicates not only her familiarity with this particular school of Buddhist thought, but her strong addiction to the thinking of the Northern school. In other words, the entire study as contained in this little treatise has to do with the Bodhisattva concept, which we have discussed here on other occasions, but which perhaps it would be advantageous to summarize once more. Buddhism divides into 2 basic schools. The southern, or the school of the elders, called the Hinayana, and the northern, or the Mahayana, the great vehicle. There was originally a middle vehicle between these 2, but it did not gain any lasting prominence in Asiatic religious thinking. The southern school has as its basic project, or its great goal, the creation of the Arhat, the creation of the unworldly person who has renounced all of the material associations of life, who has rejected involvement in the mystery of existence, and has determined to attain by will and yoga the emancipation which is covered by the concept of the entry into